Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by David Wolman. David, it is 11 a.m. on the dot on a Monday, and we're here to, kind of like we did last week, where we kind of broke down kind of an overview of our 5A districts, kind of where things are at kind of the district halfway point, and kind of set the stage for what's on the line heading into the home stretch. We're going to do the same thing today, except with our 6A districts. But I got to tell you, man, we got a tall order on deck because it's just the two of us, and then the third member of our crew, Devin Hassan, who's off today. He presides over two of the four districts that we're supposed to talk about today. So we're going to have to do a very, very commendable Devin Hassan impression when talking about 9-6A and 10-6A if we're going to get through this thing in one piece.
We apologize to Dr. Pepper for not having the Dr. Pepper can out in front of us. So
the Devin Hassan. I
mean, hopefully we don't lose our sponsorship after this week from Dr. Pepper. So.
Oh, one day, man, I wish. But yes, nevertheless, we soldier on. We are going to talk about some 6A and just kind of get you all caught up as far as where things are at for our four 6A districts heading into the home stretch. I mean, last week was obviously a very, very significant week. You had some pretty major games over in 5-6A as far as shaking out the kind of the pecking order there. You had some chaos over in 9-6A, a very unexpected result there that we'll get to in a bit. But let's start off with a district that is obviously a bit more near and dear to you and I, because obviously we have we cover all 8 teams in this district, that being District 6A. As we now get an idea as far as what's in store there. So last week was a wild one in 6-6A, and we can kind of start there because maybe it was only a matter of time before COVID came calling, and we had a couple teams have to cancel some games due to positive tests within their programs related to the pandemic. Hebron and Plano. This is, ironically enough, those two teams, they played each other not too long ago, and then in the fallout from that game, a 42-38 victory by the Plano Wildcats. Both teams have had to shut things down for a couple weeks. Hebron, it was a little over a week ago on Sunday, they made the announcement official that they were going to have to cancel their next two games against Coppell and against Marcus. One thing from that game against Plano is that their head coach, Brian Brazel, he wasn't there because he had already learned of a positive COVID test for himself. So nevertheless, he was off quarantining. So coincidence or not, you've seen obviously quite a bit of a unfortunate trickle-down effect from that game because, Hebron has to shut things down for 2 weeks on that Sunday afterwards, and then later on in the week, on Thursday, you get word that Plano has to make the call, and they have to then cancel their next two games because of a positive test within their program. Games against Lewisville and then this week's game against Plano East will not take place because these decisions were made by the superintendents and upper administration. They go down as no contest. So it's just they're wiped from the slate. It's like they never happened, which got to admit that's going to be really weird because Plano East it's kind of it's a cornerstone in Plano ISD athletics. This will be the first year since 1981 that game will not take place. That was obviously, back when it was only a one high school city, I should say. But yeah, it's going to be weird not having Plano East on the docket this week, but that's
the way it goes.
COVID doesn't care, man. Yeah, COVID does not care. So
no.
As far as kind of the consequences from this, because there are consequences, because this does indeed stink for anybody who's involved, whether you're missing 2 district games or missing 1, is when you're looking, obviously, it denies you a chance to compete, which is obviously the big thing. And you think if you're a team like Plano right now, who is coming off your first win of the season, you finally got that win under new head coach Todd Ford, in fairly dramatic fashion too. They've had a number of games go right down to the wire, and they finally come up on the right end of one against Hebron, a longtime rival of theirs, and now there's no chance to build off of that. You're feeling good heading into this week against Lewisville, which was probably going to be a pretty entertaining game. Then obviously you would have been really jazzed to play your biggest rival the following week against Plano East. Those opportunities are out the window now, and for a team that's just 1-2 in district, you're now up against it when it comes to trying to wedge your way into the playoff conversation, because when you look at basically the way that the tiebreakers are going to be sorted out and the things that kind of the hierarchy and what's going to be considered as far as who makes the playoffs out of this district, because now we're at a point where not everyone's going to play the same number of district games. Some might be fortunate enough to complete all 7, but for sure that Plano can play only no more than 5 at this point. Plano and Hebron can play no more than 5, and then you have some other schools like Coppell, like Marcus. They might only play 6 and whatnot. So the way that they're going to determine the 4 playoff teams initially is basically district wins is the first thing as far as the protocols go. So it's first district wins, then, if there's any ties there, then you get into head-to-head and so forth. So, yeah, to not get a chance to play district games, in a 7-game district schedule to miss out on at least 2 district ball games, that is massive.
Yeah.
So if you're a team like Plano right now that's 1-2, you basically, when you get back, Thanksgiving week and you have games lined up against Flower Mound and Plano East to close out, you kind of have to win out if you're going to have any chance, I think, as far as wedging your way into the playoff conversation, which is by no means a given. So it's unfortunate, but it's just kind of a hand that these teams have been dealt. I mean, it's just kind of what you're having to work through. That was the thing when the UIL basically left it in the hands of the individual districts to come up with their own protocols on how to handle all this. You knew it was going to open yourself up to some oddball rules, as we'll get to later on with District 9-6A, and basically every district has kind of their own unique spin on this. So there are going to be some consequences that might impact some teams more than others if the pandemic comes a calling, and you're kind of seeing that right here in 6-6A. So these cancellations, they impact basically. There's only 2 teams in the district that are unaffected by this. Plano West and Flower Mound. Everybody else is going to lose at least 1 district game.
Yeah.
So this week, as you'll see with, it sucks like last week for Coppell not getting to play that game against Hebron. Then this week, the district front runner right now, Marcus, they get an unexpected bye week. So, it's an unfortunate circumstance for all involved. But yes, I mean, it really heightens the emphasis on having to close strong now if you miss out on district ball games, because, like I said, your chances of getting into the playoffs, it all comes down to ultimately how many individual wins you have in district play. That's kind of what we're, what's up against it right now for Plano and Hebron. We can look kind of elsewhere in the standings now. As far as right now where we're at, Marcus is kind of running away with this thing.
Yeah, they're set themselves up as a clear number 1 in this district. Unless something miraculous happens, they're going to win that district, championship easily.
They're 4-0 right now. They have a pretty decisive lead on what is currently at least a 3-way tie for second place between teams that didn't play last week. Lewisville, Hebron, and Coppell, they are all tied at 2-1 for second place. 1 half game back of them. At 5th place is Plano West at 2-2. The Wolves still in the thick of things. Then we had Plano, who was off last week due to COVID. They are 1-2 in district play. Flower Mound got in the win column for the first time in district play last week. They are 1-3. Plano East bringing up the rear in 8th place at 0-4. We can start with Marcus because this was it's been pretty emphatic the way the Marauders have gone about conducting their business. They're 7-0 overall. They're 4-0 in district play. Their district ball games, you credit Coppell for at least staying within striking distance most of the way, because outside of that, it hasn't even been close, man. Their average margin of victory in district play is 29 points per game. That is blowing and going.
It's not just one side of the ball you got to focus on against Marcus. It's both sides.
Oh, yeah. Their defense is great, too.
I remember asking Coach Atkinson after the game, I'm like, everybody knows about your offense, but, what people should know about your defense? He goes, you know what? You got to have good complementary football, and we're here to win a state championship, and, you got to have a good defense, and we've got one.
It's a deep defense, too.
It is.
They run a lot of guys in and out. If you just look at the individual stats, there's no one that's just going to blow you away as far as someone who's going to lead the district in tackles or anything like that. But they've got so many different guys that are all capable of contributing at all 3 levels of the defense, too. That linebacker core specifically has really, really stood out in the games that I've got to see. There's, Ty Gainey, Emmerich DePona. The defense is only allowing 19.8 points per game in district. So when you factor that in with how well the offense is executing right now, it is – they're checking all the boxes, man. They look far and away the best team in the district. No one has really given them much resistance. I'm curious to see what Lewisville can do later on, just because of the ceiling of that offense. But right now, though, they look like head and shoulders above the rest of the pack.
I remember the game I covered against Marcus. You were just talking about the defense.
Or against Coppell, yeah. Between Coppell and Marcus, yeah, you're good.
Coppell and Marcus, I'm sorry. We knew what Coppell's passing offense is capable of. Entering that game, they had almost 1,400 passing yards on the season. Yeah. And obviously, you look at the wide receivers that they got. KJ Liggins, who had all but 100, who had over 100 receiving yards in all but one game entering that. And that one game was 94 yards. So
he essentially has over 100.
Yeah. If we just round it up just a little bit, obviously Anthony Black and Dylan Nelson. You know how many passing yards Coppell had in that first half? 37.
37. Goodness.
So that just shows you how potent Marcus's defense right there.
Goodness gracious.
And whenever they go to the playoffs, they're going to go down. Like I think we looked at the numbers right there as far as enrollment. Like you put them in Division II right there. I mean, they got a chance to go really far.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see what they can do. They got 3 rounds deep last year before running into Amarillo, Tascosa. That was their deepest playoff run since the late 90s. They look primed to build off of that this season. Garrett Nussmeier, he just within the last month, he's broken the school records for passing yards and passing touchdowns, which that was inevitable given what the level this kid's been playing at. But he's currently 3rd in the area in passing right now among 6A schools with 2,342 yards. He's completing 71% of his passes too, and it's not a dink and dunk offense by any stretch.
No.
He lets that thing fly. He's got some great receivers out there that do a really good job kind of thriving when the plays break down, and he's especially great at that too, just kind of improvising and making stuff happen on the fly like that. He's got 27 touchdown passes, only 4 interceptions. J. Michael Sturdivant, Cal commit, his top target out there, 713 yards and 8 touchdowns. They've started to kind of pick things up in the run game as well. They're such a fun offense to watch.
It is.
You could just watch Nussmeier back there scramble for his life and just get off just these off-balance passes that just somehow find the target right on the dime. They're playing so well right now.
I remember it was a play against Coppell, and it was I think it was the second quarter, and it was 3rd and 16, and Coppell sends some players, multiple players on the right side, and Nussmeier's flushed to his left side, and a lot of high school quarterbacks, they might freak out whenever they're seeing that pressure, but he's a cool customer in the pocket. All he does is he sees green grass out there, runs for a 20-yard gain right there. So that just shows you not only can he, he can set up reset up to his left, but he can also take off and run first down whenever he needs to. So, he can just improvise in so many ways.
I kind of saw the same thing in their game against Plano, where again he gets flushed out of the pocket, has to go to his left. He's bearing down on the sideline. He's got the pass rush right on him, and he just whips the ball across his body down to the middle of the field. And I was either Tyler Schott or Dallas Dudley that he finds just streaking down there, and it just falls right into their hands. It was a perfectly placed pass, just a spectacular highlight. And they look so good right now. Marcus they're kind of running away with this thing so far with a 4-0 start. Like I said, though, I'm curious to see what they still have the Battle of the Axe game against Lewisville, and it's just because Lewisville's offense has gotten back on track since that slow start against Plano West. They lost that game 27-17, but they've turned it around. Obviously, since then they've eclipsed 50 points in their next 2 games against Plano East and Flower Mound, and it's the usual suspects. Damian Martinez didn't play last week, and he's still leading the area in rushing. That's just insane.
That's crazy.
He's 1,189 yards on the season, 17 touchdowns. He's averaging almost 10 yards a carry. Division I schools are finally starting to take notice. He's starting to get in, get some offers going, and surely he's got plenty of bright future ahead of him.
Did I see Notre Dame on the list the other week?
I have not seen. I forget who it. Might have been one of the. Might have been like maybe Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech?
I think it was Georgia Tech.
Okay, that I know somebody at least. He's starting to get Division I for sure, which was only a matter of time. When you're leading Class 6A in the Dallas area in rushing, then that just kind of comes with the territory.
Exactly.
But the passing offense was picked right back up with Talon Green, 1,704 yards, 15 touchdowns. It's just you look at the kind of what's left for them, and again, this is a team that missed out on a chance to play last week. So every win is going to be pivotal, for them going forward. But they've got a huge game coming up this week against Coppell. That's a game, obviously, given that they're tied in the standings, is going to have a drastic effect on potentially who gets second place in this district. And then you got the following week against Marcus. So it's. You worry about maybe losing a little bit of momentum with having to take a week off and maybe getting that extra time away and whatnot. So maybe they get a chance to heal up. There is that, but you were in such a good way offensively that you worry about maybe losing a little bit of that luster.
Well, Coppell's in the same situation too. They didn't have a game last week, so
that is fair. So, but I'm anxious to see kind of what happens there. But Lewisville, they've gotten things back on track, starting to look like a team that had some pretty lofty expectations coming into the season. And then with Coppell, like we've alluded to in their game against Marcus, but they're in the thick of this thing too. They're 2-1, and for a team that was looking to kind of reignite its fire as a playoff program, they're in a good spot looking ahead. So what's kind of the vibe right now as far as what you've seen out of Coppell, and what's at stake for them heading into these final few weeks?
It's a team that has a lot of fight. Even like when they got down against Marcus, when they had just 3 points in the first half against them, when they had just the 37 passing yards. It's a team that can continues to fight. They don't care how much time is left. They don't care what the final score is. They're just going to keep battling. Ryan Walker threw for over 180 yards in the second half of that game. KJ Liggins had 2 touchdowns. Anthony Black had 1 as well too. So they're just going to keep fighting, scratching, crawling. I think they even got to within two possessions at one time, and then they just couldn't. It was just a little bit too late right there. But I think it's a team, right? A Coppell team that that can score. It's just consistency right now. And you've seen it not only in that game, but also you take the Plano game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where they had that 20-point third quarter, and it looks like, they're just going to cruise to victory out there. And all of a sudden they had some special teams gaffes in the fourth quarter that made it a little bit more interesting than what Coach DeWitt probably wanted it to be. So, I mean, it's a team that, whenever they play good, they're a very, very good team. But whenever they have some mistakes, whenever they have some drives that, that aren't going well, not only one drive, but maybe 2 or 3 drives in a row.
You got to compound on them a bit.
Exactly, yeah. So if they can just find some consistency, I think it's a team that can make a lot of noise. Once
they clear this week against Lewisville, then they actually do have at least a pretty encouraging closing stretch with games against Plano East and Flower Mound. Yeah. So they're in good shape right now. It's a good spot to be in if you're looking to get back to the playoffs and you're in your Coppell right now.
Absolutely.
One of the biggest surprises in the district, and honestly maybe the area this year, has been Plano West, a program that is really not that far removed from a 34-game losing streak. And wouldn't you know, they're 2-2 in district. They have earned every right to be mentioned among the Lewisvilles, Coppells, Hebrons, those other teams that are vying for playoff spots. They've looked the part too. They have that signature win over Lewisville to kick off the district slate, and they're kind of in a district where it feels like anybody can put up 40 plus on a given night, which is the caliber of offenses in this district. West is kind of an anomaly in that respect, in that they're more of a defense first team. They're allowing just 22.4 points per game on that side of the ball. They've got great play from a number of guys: Jacob Stevens, standout linebacker committed to Lamar, Cole Frederick, stud up front, and then Tyler Harrell in the secondary. In the offense, it's doing just enough. They've found ways to manufacture wins in different ways. It's big on kind of being predicated on an efficient passing game. It's not a team that's going to really stretch the field a whole lot, but they've got some guys, Jabraden King-Woods, Tyler Harrell, that are capable of kind of stretching the field a bit. Jackson Stambaugh is another one, getting some yards after the catch and whatnot. But the bread and butter has really been that run game of theirs. Taborn Yates entered the year as kind of expected to be the bell cow, and he's unfortunately been kind of on and off with injuries. At least during the district schedule, he's been battling a bit of a quad issue. But that's where they've kind of unearthed some key pieces for their future, and a couple sophomores that look like they could be really, really big contributors for them down the road. Dermot White is a guy who's really, really picked up his his level of play in recent weeks and kind of steadying the run game impressively for, again, just a sophomore. But that running game hasn't missed much of a beat, with him back there taking carries instead of Yates. And then Vance Fauerbacher, who he basically has played all over the place to begin. Again, he's just a sophomore, but obviously, head coach Tyler Sukup sees a lot of promise in his versatility, because he's their backup quarterback, and they would use him occasionally as kind of a change of pace, more of a mobile option, call some design runs for him. But he also punts the ball for them on special teams, and he's one of the contributors, actually a big contributor in the secondary for them as well. So he contributes all over. Again, it's just a sophomore. And then in their game against Plano East, because of an injury to quarterback Greg Drawn, he got the start, and they were able to win that game 34-26. He was really, really impressive. So, you're just thinking down the road, the future is really, really bright for this program all of a sudden.
It very is. That's a team that's not going to be on a 34-game losing streak at all anytime soon.
I know. It's they got big games coming up against Flower Mound and Hebron these next 2 weeks, and they're in contention for a playoff spot. It wouldn't shock anyone if they were able to follow through on that when you look at what they've got coming up.
Yeah.
It would be their first playoff berth since 2014, which, if you had told me that they would be at this juncture already last season at this point, it's such an impressive turnaround for them. Coach Sukup has done such an awesome job getting that program on the right track and back to playing the caliber of football that they were, obviously, before things took a little bit of a dip south for a few years.
And the way their schedule is set up and the way the district its executive committee set up the playoff situation this year is that it's not the district record with wins and losses. It's just the number of wins.
Yeah.
And they still have 3 games left. And some of these teams might not even get 5 district games under their belts right here. So if they're able to run the table, and they've got a pretty favorable schedule with Flower Mound, Hebron, and Plano. So if they can win at least 2 or 3 of those, they got a excellent chance of being in the playoffs.
If it's a matter of just kind of fortune as far as being able to avoid any sort of hiccups related to the pandemic, whether you have any positive tests within your own program or an upcoming opponent has any as well. Like I said, them and Flower Mound are the only 2 teams that aren't impacted currently, at least, by the by the Plano Hebron cancellations and whatnot. So it's an advantageous spot to be in. I mean, if nothing else, and obviously it's nothing that they have anything to do with. It's just kind of some good fortune in their respect. And same with Flower Mound. All of a sudden now, that game Friday between Plano West and Flower Mound, there's a bit of an added layer of intrigue to it, obviously with what's happening elsewhere in the district with the shutdowns. But then with Flower Mound, all of a sudden now coming to life last week with that offense that had been going through a bit of a rough patch. They had only averaged 17.8 points per game leading into last Friday's game against Plano East. And then they haul off and beat Plano East 63-21.
What happened there? What flipped the switch there?
The offense had its best game of the year by a freaking mile, man. There's been some promise with this junior quarterback that they've been rolling with, Nick Evers. He's already got some Division I interest from multiple programs, and he had his best game of the year by a long shot. He was 31 of 37 for 452 yards and 4 touchdowns. Goodness, he had a rushing touchdown as well, so 5 touchdowns for him, and just an absolute breakout performance for Nick Evers. His top receiver, Parker Clark, he had 12 catches for 234 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Goodness.
It's like Plano East was playing with 10 guys on the field at all times in that game. It was, and Cade Edline went over 100 yards receiving as well. He had 10 catches for 117 and 1 touchdown. The defense has been, even despite their losing streak, as I believe they had lost 4 consecutive games prior to that win. Mm-hmm. The defense had been solid on the year. Those performances, against Marcus and Lewisville notwithstanding and whatnot. But, if the offense has turned a corner, if they figured something out here with Evers in that passing game, then, that could make for a pretty fascinating home stretch for the Jaguars.
You feel like it's just like them just finally, getting on the same page, because number one, it's the pandemic, affected a lot of teams this year with all the pieces that they lost from last year. Maybe sometimes it might take several games for everything to click, and maybe this is the game where everything, it all comes together. It feels like, all the reps and all the struggles that we've had, getting everything on the same page right there. This is a game where it's going to finally click. Yeah,
because worth kind of keeping note at the start of the season. This Flower Mound offense, again, you think of just the bar that program has set for itself over the years on offense. They only had 2 starters coming back on that side of the ball. So, naturally, if this is, again, finally them getting all on the same page, then, look out. They've got games remaining against, let's see, they play, where is it at?
They play at home against Plano West.
Yeah, they play Plano West, they play Plano, and they play Coppell to close out. So, granted, there are currently just 1-3, so you have to keep winning games. You've got to win probably, I think, at least 3, 4, I think is probably kind of the sweet spot. But, the margin for error is already pretty slim right now, but they've at least got themselves with some, you at least see some positive returns now that you can build off of heading into that home stretch, which is huge for the Jaguars. And then there's Plano East. We can just a quick note on Plano East, and then we can move on to another district finally.
Okay.
It's just a tough break for them right now at 0-7. And then, not getting to play the Plano game is costly, first off, because you look at what they have left on their schedule. They got to play Marcus and they got to play Coppell. So they're probably staring down the barrel of 0-9 right now. Again, they could pull some spoiler magic and maybe just throw this entire thing into a tizzy, but they're certainly not going to be favored in either of those games. And they would be, just for a team that just hasn't been able to kind of again, you talked about just the lack of consistency with a team like Coppell, and Plano East has kind of gone through that same sort of thing this year. It would be the 3rd time in 4 years that a PISD team has gone winless, though, if it indeed pans out, which you never like to see. It's not. No. No one deserves, with all the work that these kids put in, with everything they've been up against this year, you don't want to see anybody go winless. So hopefully for East's sake, they find some way to salvage it. But they've got a really, really tough draw, especially with this game against Plano on Friday falling through. So that's a look at District 6A. Let's shift gears and talk about. I'm not even going to read the standings for District 9 6A because they don't matter.
Okay, who Who's the team that had the best record coming in there?
It was Rowlett. So let's just kind of set the stage for what happened, because things got turned upside down with District 9 6A last week. So as we've talked about, they've been doing this. They decided to kind of pivot away from a traditional district schedule format, and they were doing kind of a pod zone system or whatnot, basically separating the 8 teams into 4 separate zones. The first part of the district schedule was supposed to be the teams from the zones playing one another to determine their seeds. And then starting last week, you're going to have zone seeding games where you'd have the 1 seed from Zone A play the 4 seed from Zone B, and so forth. But then you had, of the 4 games that were scheduled last week, only 2 of them took place because, like I said, COVID doesn't care how you structure your schedule. And COVID has unfortunately come calling with some positive cases surfacing with North Garland and Lakeview. And they've had to reshuffle the schedule a bit. And that unfortunately kind of threw off the seamless structure that they were hoping to achieve in this with this schedule. So they had to the coaches met last week in the district and kind of had to call a bit of an audible, and they basically decided that last week's set of seeding games would actually be for playoff spots. So, and mind you, there's still plenty left to go in the regular season. Teams have not finished playing games yet, but those games last week between Rowlett and Wiley, Sachse and South Garland, because of what 9-6A had decided in advance, those games decided 2 of the playoff teams in this district. And it's certainly an unintended consequence of all this, because you had the one result that really kind of turned a lot of heads as far as what it actually meant. But yes, Rowlett, which entered that game against Wiley with a 3-0 record, going up against a Wiley team that, even though they were 0-5, they had begun to slowly start to kind of get things on track, whatnot. But Wiley picked a perfect time to play its best game of the season.
That's right.
Because they defeated Rowlett 30-27. And again, in a normal season, that's just a midseason hiccup for Rowlett. You re-rack, get back at it next week, and try to keep working towards a playoff berth. But in these most unusual of circumstances, because of the way 9-6A has decided to handle this, with those seeding games resulting in playoff berths, Wiley is in the playoffs and Rowlett is eliminated.
They can finish. The crazy thing is, Rowlett can finish the season 6-1 and they're out of the playoffs.
I know. Is it fair? No, it's not. Not at all, man. It's unfortunately, this is what the 9-6A District Executive Committee agreed on, and they understood the potential for a scenario like this to unfold. I mean, it's just, obviously it's an unintended consequence, but certainly just a tough one for Rowlett, man. You look at just all the teams in our coverage area this year, I'm not sure there is any one team that has taken more bullets from the pandemic than Rowlett has. I mean, this is a program that didn't even get to play the first month of the season because of COVID-related shutdowns and whatnot, and then they finally get going there. They get an impressive win over North Garland to start off their schedule. They get that momentous win over Sachse, their first win over Sachse since 2015, I want to say. And then you get the spirited comeback against Garland, and man, just all these good vibes with Rowlett, and then in one night,
it goes away.
In the middle of the regular season, it is all for naught. So a really, really tough break. This is a program that last year they missed the playoffs, and that was actually a year that snapped a run of 14 consecutive playoff appearances for Rowlett. That was a Garland ISD record. So, you're thinking about getting back on track and reigniting that playoff tradition, and everything leading into this game last Friday said that they were well on track to do so, but just because of the awkward nature of the pandemic and the way that they decided to schedule this all, it's all for naught. It's such a bummer.
You feel bad for those kids.
For sure, man. There's, like I said, the other playoff spot, though, was locked up by Sachse, who was, the subject of our game of the week last week. And, it was something about being game of the week just lights a fire under the Sachse Mustangs, man, because they took Garland to the woodshed a few weeks ago when we talked about him for Game of the Week, and then last week against South Garland, 57-13. Wasn't even a ball game. 624 yards of offense from Sachse, 490 coming on the ground on almost 10 yards a carry. Brian Okoye had 224 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Alex Orgy at quarterback, 109 on the ground and 3 touchdowns. It was in their offensive line obviously had a lot to do with that as well. So Sachse looks right on schedule there. They were able to snap a 2-game losing streak, and they're now bound for the playoffs for the 6th straight year. We still need to see what happens elsewhere, though, in the district. North Garland and Naaman Forest, they were supposed to play last week in a seeding game to decide a playoff berth. That's now going to take place November 27th. I don't know if they've officially set a date yet for the Lakeview Centennial Garland game, but that's the other game that will decide who gets into the playoffs. So anything else that happens in the district is unfortunately kind of just a footnote. But yeah, obviously the big news from that one is just a tough way for Rowlett's season to unfortunately end. I mean, and I say end, and they're still going to be playing later on this week. But as far as their hopes of a playoff berth, it's unfortunately over.
Yeah, for Rowlett, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I mean, you just want to have the kids go off on a good note right there.
Yeah.
So I mean, they understood the circumstances coming into the season right there. And I think right now, any time that they can play football is a good thing, especially after what happened earlier in the season. So, I mean, if they can win these final 3 games, that's got to feel good for those kids.
Yeah. It's so yes, that's a look at least right now is kind of where things are at in District 9-6A. Again, a very, very unorthodox week in 9-6A. We actually had, though, again, knock on wood, but it's been, for the most part, pretty seamless over in 5-6A. And that was a week last year where there was a lot of moving and shaking as far as some games that had major stakes on district championship races, the playoff races and whatnot. So, I mean, all 3 games carried major significance. And I got to see one. This was the game that I probably had circled more so than any other this season. I was really excited to see Allen and Denton Geyer lock horns at Eagle Stadium last week in a game that, by all accounts, was supposed to be, two of the 10, 15 best teams in the state. And we've seen them do it a lot in advance. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that it happened once again. But Allen they raised their level of play for these big district games. They've just shown it over the years. I mean, they've won now. This is 63 in a row in district play that they've won. They've now won 80 consecutive regular season games. And this one, the final score was 56-38. So a largely emphatic performance by Allen. This was a 42-10 ball game in the first half. And
the score 42-10 at halftime. Tell me how many yards the Green Twins had at halftime.
The Green Twins, I believe it was, so they had combined 1 reception for either 0 or 1 yards, depending on how generous you are with the spot of the ball. This was all about their run game. Mm-hmm. The work the offensive line did up front, just the team-wide run blocking, their run game it mauled Geyer. There was a stretch there where, Geyer is able to march down to get a field goal to start. Allen, bit of a bend-don't-break start on defense. But then Allen just cruises right down the field. Jordan Johnson scores on a touchdown, and then they really blew this one open there at a stretch that bridged the first and second quarters, where they scored touchdowns on 3 consecutive plays. And they were all on these big runs of at least 50 yards apiece. Jalen Jenkins and quarterback General Booty even got it on the mix. 52-yard touchdown runs for each. And then Jordan Johnson, he had an 82-yard touchdown run. So in 3 plays, they totaled 186 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns.
That's not a bad average.
They were off to the races in that one. Johnson finished the night with 132 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Jenkins with 97 and 2 touchdowns. Booty had 82 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Even their backup quarterback, Jake Wolf, who saw a lot of time in the second half, he had 2 rushing touchdowns as well. They had 8 rushing touchdowns in this one, David. It was, and again, just the work of the offensive line, just absolutely overwhelming Geyer at the point of attack and opening up some holes that, I mean, those running backs are explosive enough as is, but when you have the room to run that they did on Friday, it's just, they made it look easy out there, unfortunately for Geyer, which I know is, they've obviously had better days on defense in that one, but they just got absolutely overwhelmed in that aspect of the game. And, they were able to make it a little bit interesting in the third quarter for a few moments. They had a run of 21 unanswered points, including a key turnover forced on a kickoff return that, maybe gave some anxious moments there for a time or two, but then Allen went right back to the run game, and Geyer had nothing for it. It was just an absolute clinic by Allen, and certainly a major statement as far as reasserting the Eagles as the best team in this district. This was one where, it was only 3 people on our panel here, but 2 of the 3 picked Geyer to win. And I believe I heard in the press box that the majority of the morning news writers picked Geyer to win this game. So, I mean, you don't want to give Allen, the chance to manufacture any sort of underdog identity for a program like that. But there was a lot of people thinking that Geyer had a really good chance in this game, and Allen was not feeling it, buddy. Too. It's Allen looked awesome in victory. They're still undefeated. 5-0 on the year, 3-0 in district play. Then you've had the other two games of consequence. You had Boyd and Little Elm playing Little Elm, which it's been a tough team to figure out, man.
Yeah.
You saw them against Prosper. They put up a respectable showing against Prosper. Prosper, who's state ranked, I believe, number 15 in the state. And, Little Elm only loses that game 30-20, was it? And so they didn't get run off the field by any stretch. And then they go out and, they put the fear of God in Allen with some of the, John Mateer had a career night at the expense of Allen's defense. That same Allen team that just destroyed Geyer last week. John Mateer threw for almost 500 yards against them. Little Elm totaled over 600 yards of offense, but then they turn around the following week then against Boyd, and then they're held to just 217 yards of offense. They just could never get on track. And granted, Boyd plays some pretty solid defense, and I said this last week, but despite what their record might show you, that's a team that, even with, they obviously had a rough go against Allen. They gave up 42 to Allen. They gave up 38 to Rockwall Heath. They're still holding opponents to under 20 points per game, even with those two results factored in. They've held 5 of their 7 opponents to 12 points or less.
Oh, wow.
Including Denton Braswell. It's a defense that's got some really, really strong play from their linebacking core. Matteo Bianchi, he's racking up Division I offers every week, it seems. Ethan Weslowski's been another standout player for them on that side of the ball. And they're getting some really, really timely contributions with the run game. It's been a bit of a shuffling the deck as far as who's going to be leading the backfield and carries and whatnot, whether it's due to injuries or what the case is. But it was Ellis Patterson on Friday against Little Elm, who was kind of the bell cow. He had 213 rushing yards. Really, really strong game for him. And all of a sudden now this Boyd team is in a really, really good spot because we feel like we've got the top 3 in some order. Whether it feels like now, especially with Geyer having the head-to-head win over Prosper, that maybe you're looking at Allen 1, Geyer 2, Prosper 3. But as far as that fourth place standing goes, Boyd's got wins over Little Elm and Braswell, which is a really good spot to be in. It's really kind of leading up to this game next week, the crosstown showdown against their rival McKinney. And it feels like that game's had playoff stakes on the line, at least for the past 3-4 years. And it's looking like it's going to be that case once again because McKinney was able to get a very, very timely first district win. They were able to hold off Braswell, win 34-31. We expected in this one that the offense would finally get it going given what Braswell's defense had shown. And sure enough, they have their second highest scoring output of the season, the most points they've scored since opening week against Plano. RJ Carver, that offense is going to go as far as RJ Carver can take them. And he was an absolute workhorse in this game. 33 carries for 167 yards and 2 touchdowns. They're finding different ways to get Amari Walker involved. He's new to the program, coming over from the Mesquite area, but they were able to get him involved, both as a rusher and a receiver. He had 139 total yards and 2 touchdowns. They are just 1-2 in district play, but they've already played Prosper and Geyer, and they're going to play Allen this week. So you get those games over with, and then you have a home stretch that includes Boyd and Little Elm. And if you're able to come away 2-0 in that stretch, then you should be back in the playoffs. So that's kind of a look as far as what is at stake there. Again, Prosper, they had a bye this week. They're 2-1. Their wins have come over McKinney and Little Elm. They did lose to Geyer at the last second, a game that they were kind of in control of. There's a big one looming against Allen next week, and I'm excited to see what that defense, which has been so solid all season long, what kind of resistance they can offer. Maybe they do a little bit of a better job slowing down Allen. But yeah, it was a big week last week in 5-6A, and at least we finally now have at least a little bit of clarity as far as where things stand right now heading into the home stretch. Just to kind of reiterate the standings right now in that district, Allen is in first place at 3-0. Geyer is in second place at 3-1. Prosper and Boyd are currently tied for third place at 2-1. Then you have McKinney in fifth place at 1-2. Braswell in sixth place at 1-3, and Little Elm in fourth place at 0-4. All right, so then let's see. Let's close out with a look then over at 10-6A and talk a little bit of Mesquite ISD, because it's been a district that is, we've got at least an idea as far as where kind of the heavyweights in the district lie, and as expect kind of leading into the district schedule, it's kind of materialized as such. Rockwall looks like they're on pace to win a district championship. Then you have Rockwall Heath and Skyline. They're tied for second place at 2-1. They're well back of Rockwall, who's 4-0 right now. Then things are going to get interesting. So these last 4 teams, there's not a whole lot separating them. You have North Mesquite 1-1 in district play. They're a half game up on Mesquite, Mesquite High at 1-2 in 5th place. Tyler Legacy is 0-2 in 6th place, and then Mesquite Horn is in 7th place at 0-3. So with respect to Mesquite ISD right now, David, what is kind of on the line, I guess, heading into this home stretch right now as we look to try to figure out if Mesquite ISD can get anybody into the playoffs at the 6A level?
Oh man, they've got between North Mesquite, and Horn. They only have 2 wins in district play. So and also it's a team that, like, a district that's been hit with a little bit of COVID as well too.
Yes.
I mean, Mesquite just had a positive case, and they weren't able to get their game against North Mesquite in last week, and then obviously not only Mesquite but Horn had a positive test as well too, so they weren't able to get in their game against Tyler Legacy. So that's two of the 3 teams right there.
Yeah.
The
only game that got played in this district last week was Rockwall and Skyline.
Yeah,
Rockwall won that game 56-6.
So check out because of that, did you see the schedule for the way the district's going to close out?
It is wild. Like, North Mesquite posted their remaining schedule on Twitter, and we're just so used to Friday Night Lights and just everything the tradition of playing under that Friday night spotlight. So here's what North Mesquite has remaining. They play this week against Skyline. I believe that game is set for Thursday. And then the following week, Thanksgiving week, they're supposed to play November 25th, which is a Wednesday, against Tyler Legacy. That following week, they then play November 30th, which is a Monday, against Rockwall. And then they close things out on December 5th, which is a Saturday, against Mesquite High School.
My goodness.
It's an ice cream headache for everyone involved in that district right now.
But it's a headache, but I mean, there's still games left to be played, and somebody's got to get that 4th spot in that district right there. Obviously, maybe Mesquite's got a chance. I mean, they started the season 0-5, but they're starting to show some signs a little bit. They had that big win over Mesquite Horn, 54-20.
Really got going in the second half.
Huge
offense.
One. Chance Edwards, but he missed a game with an injury, but earlier this season, but he went 16 of 23 for 247 yards and 6 touchdowns in that game.
That's pretty good.
Just pretty good. So they picked up their first win the other week. So I mean, they're still mathematically alive, and obviously they've got a pretty good favorable schedule right there because they don't have to worry about Rockwall or Skyline anymore.
Yeah, you have those ones behind you for sure.
So pretty much like Rockwall Heath is pretty much like the big boy you got to worry about right now. That's it.
As far as kind of the key games that are left, I mean, yeah, you are looking if Mesquite ISD is going to get a team in the playoffs out of this district, it's most likely going to be either North or Mesquite High. Yeah. Horn, unfortunately, has already lost head-to-head to both of those schools, and I mean, just when it comes down to tiebreakers, you just put yourself at a bit of too much of a disadvantage there and whatnot. So that game, December 5th, looms large. They're only separated by a half game in the playoffs currently. I'm curious to see kind of what happens with Tyler Legacy. As far as a team that might be able to kind of right the ship and then climb their way back into that playoff mix, they started off the year pretty, on a pretty impressive note. They had wins over Lufkin and Tyler. Looked like they might have, kind of gotten things on the right track, but they've since lost 4 straight games, albeit games that, at least in district play, they only lost to Skyline by 6, and they lost to Rockwall by 5. And you mentioned they were ahead in that game against Skyline at the half.
Yeah, and then Rockwall, I think they were tied at halftime.
Yeah, so they've at least been competitive even in defeat against these upper echelon teams in the district. So, and you look at the way their schedule shakes out, and they've still got to play all 3 of the Mesquite ISD schools. So they've, just given what they've shown, I'm curious to see if they're maybe able to kind of make a push. As far as that game between Legacy and Mesquite, that game takes place November 30th again. That's a Monday. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Mesquite's kind of rediscovered their mojo that they showed against Horn and could potentially maybe make a bit of a late push. We've seen crazier things happen. I remember that year a few years ago when Mesquite Horn started off the year, was it 0-6 or 0-7, and then they were able to rally just because of the way the schedule shook out, and they were able to rally late and qualify for the playoffs and ended up going 2-3 rounds deep at that. So
never know.
We've seen crazier things happen for sure. But yeah, obviously given the way that given the way that COVID has impacted this district, a lot of the most relevant games still left to be played. So yes, do not pencil in too many Fridays for this district going forward because, like I said, there's going to be there's going to be some Monday football, going to be some Wednesday, going to be some Saturday. It's going to be all over the place for 10-6A.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Devin schedule his game coverage.
Yeah, that's going to be quite the adventure for him. So yeah, that's a look at 10-6A kind of going forward, and yeah, that's a look at kind of where all 4 of our 6A districts are at heading into the home stretch. Like I said, lots of relevant football to be played, and hopefully, fingers crossed, but hopefully these COVID scares are, you hope that they're at least behind these schools. But I mean, realistically, there's no way anyone can know. It seems like things are actually kind of going to get worse before they get better. So yeah, but nevertheless, that's kind of where things are at right now as far as 6A football goes in our coverage area, and that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Let's see, we'll be back on Thursday to talk about our reader-voted game of the week. Y'all can go to our website at starlocalmedia.com to vote on that. And yeah, folks, until then, you take care, and we will talk to y'all later.